The first time I realized my family had already written me out of their future, it was on a Tuesday morning that looked painfully ordinary. The coffee was still brewing, the house was quiet, and my name was missing from a document that would change everything. I didn't know that yet. I just knew my stomach felt tight the way it does when your body understands a truth before your mind is ready to accept it. I'm telling you this now because if you're listening to my story, chances are you felt that moment too. That pause. That subtle shift where something you trusted quietly turns against you. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 32 years old at the time, the younger daughter in a family that liked to say they valued fairness, tradition, and loyalty. Words they used often. Words they didn't live by. The email came from my mother, short, polite, carefully neutral. Family meeting this Friday. Important, please be there. No heart emoji, no explanation, just that. In my family, important usually meant one of three things: money, appearances, or decisions already made without me. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My reflection in the dark glass looked older than it had the night before. Tired, guarded, familiar. I'd learned over years not to ask questions ahead of time. Questions made them uncomfortable. And discomfort in our house was always my responsibility to manage. So I replied with a simple "I'll be there." At the time, I still believed that showing up counted for something. I was wrong. Growing up, my older brother Daniel had been the sun around which everything else revolved. His grades, his moods, his potential. I was the dependable one, the adaptable one, the one who didn't need as much. That's what they said, as if needing less was a compliment. I built a career anyway. Quietly, methodically. I worked in corporate finance, compliance, and internal audits. Not glamorous, precise, invisible when done right. I lived alone in a modest apartment outside Seattle. No kids, no spouse, just a life I'd built myself piece by careful piece. And until that Tuesday, I believed my family at least respected that. Friday came quickly. My parents' house looked the same as it always had. White siding, manicured hedges, the illusion of order. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's car was already there. So was his wife's. Of course. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and roasted chicken. My mother had cooked. That alone should have warned me something ceremonial was happening. We sat around the dining table like actors waiting for our cue. My father cleared his throat. My mother folded her hands. Daniel leaned back in his chair, relaxed, confident. Then my father slid a folder onto the table. "We've finalized our estate planning," he said. I felt my shoulders stiffen. Daniel smiled. My mother looked at me, not warmly, carefully. "We wanted you both to hear it together." The folder opened. Papers shuffled. Legal language filled the room like fog. The house, the investment accounts, the vacation property, the family business stake. All of it. Daniel's. My name appeared exactly once. As a contingency, a backup, in case something happened to him. I didn't speak at first. I actually wondered if I was missing something. A page, a clause, a sentence that said this was temporary. Then my mother said it casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. "You're more independent, Evelyn. You don't need the same support." There it was. That familiar phrase, dressed up as praise, used as justification. Daniel avoided my eyes. His wife squeezed his arm. My father nodded. This just makes sense. I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Settle. Like a final piece clicking into place. So I said slowly, "I'm excluded." My mother winced. "That's not the word we'd use." "What word would you use?" I asked. She hesitated. That was answer enough. I stood up before I realized I was going to. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. No one stopped me. No one reached out. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. My voice sounded calm, too calm. I left before anyone could explain their reasoning again. Outside, the air felt sharp, clean, like it was trying to wake me up. I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing through the ache in my chest. This wasn't about money. Not really. It was about being erased, officially, legally, deliberately. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop instead. I pulled up every financial document I'd ever touched for my parents' business. Every audit, every discrepancy I'd flagged and quietly corrected over the years. Because while my family believed I didn't need support, they'd never realized how much they depended on my silence. And for the first time, I asked myself a question that would change everything. What happens when the dependable one stops protecting everyone else? I didn't know it yet, but that question was the beginning of my revenge. And by the time this story ends, the word excluded would mean something very different for all of us. I didn't sleep that night. Not the kind of sleeplessness that comes from anxiety tossing and turning, replaying conversations. This was different. My body was still. My mind was sharp, awake in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. By 3 in the morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a yellow legal pad beside it, and a cup of coffee I didn't remember making. I wasn't spiraling, I was inventorying. Years in compliance had trained me to do this automatically. When something feels wrong, you don't react. You collect facts, you map patterns, you follow paper. And my family had left a very long paper trail. My parents' business wasn't glamorous. A regional logistics company my father had built from nothing, the kind of operation that survived on thin margins and relationships more than innovation. Daniel was the future, the successor they liked to talk about at dinner parties. What they never mentioned was that Daniel had never run a single audit, never negotiated a regulatory issue, never noticed how close the company had come to fines more than once. I had, quietly, off the clock, as a favor, as family. I pulled up archived emails, invoices, internal reports. Nothing illegal, not yet, but careless, sloppy, reliant on the assumption that no one would ever look too closely. I smiled faintly. By sunrise, I had filled 6 pages with notes. I wasn't planning revenge yet. Not consciously. I was recalibrating. Saturday morning, my phone rang. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother. Then my father. I turned the phone face down. By noon, there was a knock at my door. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. My mother stood in the hallway, perfectly dressed, her posture tight with practiced concern. She held a container of food like an offering. I was worried, she said, you left so abruptly. I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around my apartment the way she always did, as if assessing whether my life choices had finally proven her right. You didn't answer your phone, she said. I was busy, I replied. She set the food down. Your father feels terrible about how Friday went. I didn't say anything. She sighed. Daniel didn't want it to happen like this. That made me laugh, a short sound, sharp. He didn't want what to happen, I asked. Being named sole beneficiary, running the company, owning the house. She frowned. You're twisting it. No, I said calmly, I'm simplifying it. She folded her arms. You've always been sensitive. There it was again, that word. I met her eyes. You raised me to believe effort mattered. Loyalty mattered. Tell me honestly, did you ever plan to include me? Her mouth opened, closed. That's not fair, she said finally. I nodded, thank you for answering. Her expression hardened. What are you doing, Evelyn? Listening, I said. She left shortly after. The food stayed untouched. That afternoon, I received an email from the family lawyer. A courtesy follow-up. He attached the finalized documents, presumably assuming I'd want clarity. I did, but not in the way he expected. I read every line, slowly, carefully, and there it was. A clause tied to the business valuation, a dependency on projected growth figures that Daniel had personally submitted. Figures I knew were inflated. Not fabricated, just optimistic, aggressively so. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't a weapon yet, but it was leverage. Sunday night, I met my friend Lila for dinner. We'd known each other since college. She was a corporate attorney now, smart, cynical, loyal. You look calm, she said after I told her everything. I feel calm, I replied. She studied me. That scares me more than if you were angry. I smiled. Can I ask you something hypothetical? She raised an eyebrow. Always a bad sign. Go on. If a company's valuation was based on projections that didn't hold up under scrutiny, what happens? She didn't answer immediately. Then depends who's scrutinizing. And if those projections were tied to inheritance decisions, she leaned back. Then things get messy. Legally, she nodded, emotionally worse. I took a sip of wine. Good to know. She reached across the table. Evelyn, don't do anything you can't undo. I met her gaze. I've spent my whole life undoing myself to keep the peace. I'm done with that. She didn't argue. Monday morning, I went to work like nothing had changed. Same desk, same neutral smile, same efficiency. But something had shifted. When my boss asked me to review a merger proposal, I noticed inconsistencies faster than usual. When a colleague tried to brush off a risk, I didn't soften my language. I was done cushioning truths. At lunch, Daniel texted, "We should talk." I replied with one word. About what? The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Family. I set the phone down. That evening, my father called. I don't understand why you're shutting us out, he said. I closed my eyes. I didn't shut anyone out, you did. We did what we thought was best. For who, I asked. Silence. Daniel needs this, he said finally. He has responsibilities. I swallowed. And I don't. You've always landed on your feet. Yes, I said, because I had no safety net. He didn't respond. After the call ended, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker on. Somewhere below, people were living ordinary lives, unaware of the quiet wars being fought in private rooms. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. If I am invisible to them, then they won't see me move. I didn't know exactly what my next step would be, but I knew this. I was no longer asking for a place at their table. I was preparing to flip it, and in the silence that followed, something inside me felt steady, focused, ready. The first real crack appeared on a Thursday afternoon disguised as a favor. Daniel called while I was reviewing a compliance report at work. I watched his name light up, my phone felt nothing, and answered on the third ring. Hey, he said too casually. Got a minute? I'm working, I replied. So yes, but not for long. He laughed the same laugh he'd used our whole lives when he wanted something and didn't want to admit it. You always were efficient. I waited. There's a situation, he said, with the business. Of course there was. What kind of situation, I asked. He lowered his voice even though he was probably alone. Nothing serious. Just some paperwork issues, projections. The bank wants clarification. I leaned back in my chair. You submitted the projections. I know, he said quickly. But things changed. Market conditions. You understand that stuff better than I do. There it was, the unspoken truth we all pretended didn't exist. And you want me to do what I asked? Take a look, he said, quietly. Just help me clean it up before it turns into a problem. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. You want me to fix it? I said the way I always have. A pause. You're good at it, he said, and Dad's stressed. This inheritance thing has him on edge. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Send me the documents, I said finally. Relief flooded his voice. Really, thanks, Ev. I knew I could count on you. After we hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt confirmed. He hadn't called to apologize. He hadn't called to explain. He'd called because he assumed my usefulness survived my exclusion. That assumption was about to cost him everything. He emailed the files within minutes. Projections, forecasts, loan covenants, the same numbers I'd already flagged in my notebook. I reviewed them carefully, marking nothing at first. Just reading, letting the full shape of the problem reveal itself. The issue wasn't fraud, it was arrogance. Daniel had promised growth that depended on contracts that hadn't been finalized. Revenue streams that assumed zero disruption and cost reductions that existed only on spreadsheets. It was optimistic to the point of negligence. And worse, the bank had tied the company's refinancing terms directly to those projections. If they failed, the business wouldn't collapse immediately, but the inheritance valuation would. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone. I opened my notebook and wrote another sentence. They taught me to fix their mistakes. They never taught me I could stop. The next day, Daniel texted again. Any thoughts? I waited an hour before replying. Still reviewing. He sent a thumbs-up emoji. Casual, confident. That weekend, my parents invited me to dinner. I almost didn't go, but curiosity won. The house was louder than usual. My sister-in-law was there. My mother was in rare hosting form, all smiles and forced warmth. Daniel avoided my eyes. We sat down to eat. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. Daniel mentioned you've been helping him with the projections, he said. I took a sip of water. He asked me to look. My mother nodded approvingly. You've always been so reliable. Reliable? Like a tool kept in a drawer. And my father asked, and what I replied. What do you think? Daniel said quickly. Is it fixable? I set my fork down. That depends, I said calmly. Do you want accurate numbers or attractive ones? The table went quiet. Daniel laughed nervously. Accurate, obviously. Then the valuation changes, I said, significantly. My mother frowned. What does that mean? It means, I continued, that the business isn't worth what you think it is. Not yet. Not on paper. My father stiffened. Are you saying Daniel misrepresented the company? I'm saying, I replied, that the projections were optimistic beyond reason. Any external review will see that. Daniel's face flushed. You're exaggerating. I met his gaze. I haven't exaggerated anything. Silence pressed in. Well, my mother said briskly, that's all technical. The will is already done. I nodded. That's what makes it relevant. Her eyes narrowed. What are you implying? Nothing, I said. Just explaining consequences. Dinner ended shortly after. As I was leaving, Daniel followed me to the door. "Why are you doing this?" he hissed. "You're making things harder than they need to be." I turned to him. "You made them harder when you assumed I'd clean up your mess for free." He scoffed. "You're bitter." "No," I said quietly, "I'm precise." That night, I sent an email to the bank's compliance contact. Not an accusation, just a question. A request for clarification on how they handled variance between projected and realized growth. Perfectly professional, perfectly innocent. On Monday morning, the response came. They were conducting a routine review. Daniel called me 10 minutes later, panic bleeding through his voice. "Did you talk to the bank?" he demanded. "I asked a question," I said. "You had no right." "I had every right," I replied. "I'm listed as an internal consultant on past audits. Remember?" He swore under his breath. "You're trying to sabotage me," he said. I closed my eyes. "No, Daniel. I stopped protecting you." He hung up. By Friday, my father called, his voice strained. "The bank is asking for revised documentation," he said. "They're talking about reassessing the company's value." I leaned against my kitchen counter, the city humming outside my window. "That's what happens," I said, "when numbers meet reality." This could affect everything, he snapped. The inheritance, the house, Daniel's future. "And mine?" I asked. He didn't answer. I hung up gently. That evening, I sat alone watching the lights come on across the skyline. I felt no triumph, no guilt, just alignment. For the first time, the truth wasn't cushioned, it wasn't softened to spare feelings. It was standing on its own. And I knew then with absolute certainty that this wasn't just about money or documents. This was about control. And in the quiet that followed, I understood something my family never had. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts the moment you stop fixing what benefits the people who broke you. The first public consequence landed on a Wednesday morning, and it arrived quietly the way real damage always does. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel's wife. "We need to talk, please." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my calendar and blocked off the next 2 hours. Not for a meeting, for observation. At 10:15, my father called. I let it ring twice before answering. "The bank wants an in-person review," he said without preamble. "They're coming next week." I said nothing. "They're asking questions, Evelyn," he continued. "Detailed ones." "I warned you," I replied. This could delay everything, he snapped. "The refinancing, the estate planning, all of it." I leaned back in my chair. "You shouldn't have rushed decisions that depended on unstable numbers." His breath caught. "You're enjoying this." That almost made me smile. "No," I said. "I'm documenting it." He hung up on me. By lunchtime, the tone shifted. My mother called, her voice unusually soft. "Sweetheart," she said, using the word like a tool. "This has gone far enough." "I disagree," I replied. "You're putting your brother under unbearable pressure." I didn't submit the projections. "You know what I mean." I did. She meant I was violating the unspoken rule. That I was supposed to absorb discomfort so no one else had to. "Pressure reveals character," I said. "Let's see what his looks like." She gasped softly. "How can you talk like that about your own family?" I stared out the window at the gray Seattle sky. "How could you decide my worth without me in the room?" Silence. "Then we did what we thought was fair." "That's not true," I said. "You did what was convenient." She hung up. That afternoon, I received an email marked urgent from the family lawyer. He wanted to clarify my role in recent communications. I responded politely, professionally. I attached previous correspondence showing my long-standing advisory position. No accusations, just facts. That night, I dreamed of the dining table from my childhood home. Only this time, every chair was occupied except mine. When I tried to sit, the chair vanished. I woke up calm. The bank review happened the following Tuesday. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. Daniel called me halfway through. "They're tearing it apart," he said, voice shaking. "They're asking about contingency plans, market volatility, historical corrections. This is your fault." I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of him unraveling. "This is what due diligence sounds like," I said. "You could stop this," he pleaded. "Just tell them you stand by the numbers." I laughed quietly. I never did. When the call ended, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not satisfaction, release. That evening, my parents called a family meeting. Emergency. I almost didn't go. But then I realized something important. They needed me there. I arrived to find my mother pacing, my father seated stiffly at the head of the table, Daniel hunched over his phone. No one offered me a drink. "We need to resolve this," my father said as soon as I sat down. "Resolve what?" I asked. Daniel looked up, eyes bloodshot. "The bank is reconsidering the refinancing. If they pull back, the business takes a hit, a big one." "And the inheritance?" I asked. My mother flinched. "It could change," she admitted, significantly. I folded my hands in my lap. "Then maybe it should." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. You're doing this to punish us. I met his gaze steadily. No, I'm letting consequences happen. My father leaned forward. What do you want? There it was, the first honest question I'd heard in years. I want accuracy, I said, transparency, and acknowledgement. My mother scoffed. Acknowledgement of what? That you excluded me because it was easier, I replied. That you relied on me while pretending I didn't matter. Silence fell. Finally, my father spoke. What if we amend the will? My heart skipped, not from hope, from clarity. Amend how I asked. He hesitated. We could reconsider allocations. Daniel's head snapped up. You can't be serious. I'm fixing what she broke, my father said sharply. I watched them argue, voices rising, alliances shifting. For the first time, I wasn't mediating. I wasn't smoothing edges. I was watching the structure collapse under its own weight. My mother turned to me, eyes sharp. Is this what you want to tear us apart? I stood slowly. You were already apart. I just stopped pretending we weren't. I left before they could respond. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. I breathed deeply, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Freedom. The next morning, I received a message from the lawyer. Given recent developments, your parents are reconsidering the estate structure. Your presence is requested. Requested. Not required, not assumed. I smiled faintly. At work, I found it harder to concentrate. Not because I was distracted, but because everything felt sharper. My instincts clearer. My voice steadier. That afternoon, my boss stopped by my desk. You seem different lately, she said. More direct. I've stopped minimizing, I replied. She nodded slowly. It suits you. That evening, Daniel sent me a final text. You've made your point. Are you happy now? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed back. This was never about happiness, it was about balance. I turned my phone off. I didn't know how this would end. Whether the will would change. Whether the business would survive intact. Whether my family would ever forgive me. But I knew this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding everything together. And as the silence settled around me, I realized something that felt almost sacred. When you stop carrying the weight for everyone else, you finally learn how heavy it really was. The will didn't change overnight. That was the first lesson. People who rewrite reality for a living don't surrender their scripts easily. They stall, they delay, they soften language. They hope time will wear you down. My parents were experts at that. 2 weeks passed after the emergency meeting. 2 quiet, careful weeks where no one called me directly. Communication came through the lawyer, polite emails, neutral phrasing, a lot of under consideration. In the meantime, the bank's review continued, and the business began to feel it. Daniel stopped posting his usual optimistic updates on LinkedIn. The tone shifted from confident leadership to vague resilience. Internally, I heard through old contacts that hiring was frozen, projects paused, vendors unpaid a little longer than usual. Nothing catastrophic, yet. But pressure doesn't need to break something immediately to be effective. It just needs to remind people how fragile things really are. One afternoon, I ran into my Aunt Margaret at the grocery store, my mother's sister, the one who always saw more than she said. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You finally stopped shrinking, she said quietly. I blinked. Is that what people are saying? She smiled faintly. People are uncomfortable. That's how I know you're doing something right. She leaned closer. Your mother is furious. Not because of the money, because she lost control of the narrative. I nodded. She always believed silence meant agreement. Margaret patted my arm. Silence only works when the quiet one cooperates. That night I received an email from the lawyer requesting a private meeting. Just me. I agreed. We met in his downtown office, glass walls and neutral art designed to calm people into compliance. He offered coffee. I declined. Your parents are considering a revised structure, he said carefully. One that reflects contributions. I raised an eyebrow. Contributions measured how? He cleared his throat. Operational involvement, risk mitigation, advisory support. In other words, everything I'd done quietly for years. And Daniel, I asked? He hesitated. Daniel is resistant. I smiled. Of course he is. The lawyer folded his hands. There is concern that ongoing scrutiny could further devalue the estate. There is certainty, I corrected, that pretending I don't exist will. He studied me for a long moment. You're very composed. I'm very practiced, I replied. When I left the office, I felt lighter. Not because I was winning, but because I was finally negotiating from truth instead of fear. That evening, Daniel showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I opened the door and found him standing there, hair unkempt, jacket wrinkled, confidence visibly eroded. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped aside. He paced my living room like a trapped animal. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to me?" "Yes," I said. "I've been living it for decades." "That's not fair," he snapped. "You chose a different life." "No," I said calmly. "I adapted to the one you were handed." He stopped pacing. "What do you want?" I met his eyes, acknowledgement and equity. "You want half?" "I want honesty," I replied. "The numbers will decide the rest." He scoffed. "You think you deserve this more than me?" "I think I deserve not to be erased," I said. "Everything beyond that is negotiable." His shoulders sagged. "Mom says you're tearing the family apart." I nodded. "Families built on denial crack when truth shows up." He laughed bitterly. "You always were dramatic." That word again. I stepped closer. "You always were protected." He flinched. "Do you know?" I continued, "How many times I covered for your mistakes. How many nights I stayed up fixing things you never knew were broken." He looked away. "Say it," I said softly. He swallowed. "You helped." "That's not it." He exhaled sharply. "You carried more than your share." There it was. The first honest sentence he'd ever said to me. I nodded. "Thank you." He left shortly after. Not reconciled, but changed. The next morning my mother called. Her voice was cold, controlled, dangerous. "Daniel told me what you said." I leaned against the counter. "Which part?" "That you've been carrying this family." I waited. "You've always had a victim complex," she continued. "But this is manipulative." I felt something inside me go very still. "No," I said, "this is boundaries. You're punishing us." "I'm refusing to disappear." She sighed sharply. "What do you want, Evelyn?" The same question again. "I want the truth reflected in writing," I said. "And I want it before the bank finalizes its review." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a timeline." She hung up. That afternoon, the bank released preliminary findings. Nothing public, but enough to force renegotiation. Daniel called me again that night. "They're revising the valuation," he said quietly. "Down." I closed my eyes. "I know." "Dad's furious." "I know." "Mom's blaming you." "I know." A pause. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. I softened my tone, just a fraction. "You don't," I said. "You live with it, the same way I did." When the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming outside, and felt something unexpected. Not joy. Relief. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't hoping for scraps of validation. I was standing in the open. And somewhere deep inside, I understood something that would carry me through whatever came next. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to keep holding up a lie. The revision arrived on a Friday afternoon, folded into an email that pretended it was routine. Updated valuation attached. No apology, no acknowledgement, just numbers. I opened the document slowly, the way you do when you already know what you're going to find, but need to see it anyway. The business was worth less now. Not ruined, not broken, just stripped of its fantasy. The projected growth Daniel had built his future on was gone, replaced with conservative assumptions, realistic margins, and language that favored caution over ambition. In other words, truth. And truth had consequences. I scrolled to the section that mattered most: estate impact. The reduction meant the inheritance my parents had planned for Daniel alone was no longer sustainable in the way they'd imagined. The tax implications alone forced a reconsideration. They could no longer afford to pretend I didn't exist. My phone rang less than a minute later. My father. "We need to meet," he said, his voice tight. "Today." We met at their house, the same dining room where I'd been erased weeks earlier. The chairs were arranged the same way, but the atmosphere had shifted, heavier, uneven. Daniel was there. My mother, too, sitting stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap like she was bracing for impact. No one offered food. My father slid the updated valuation across the table toward me. "You've seen this." "Yes," I said. "This changes things," he continued. "I warned you it would." Daniel leaned forward. "You knew this would happen." I met his gaze. I knew reality would catch up eventually. My mother exhaled sharply. "You could have softened it." "Why?" I asked. "So the truth would hurt later instead of now." She looked away. My father cleared his throat. "The lawyer recommends restructuring the will." There it was again, restructuring, a word that avoided responsibility. And I asked. "And including you," he said reluctantly, "as a primary beneficiary." I waited. "The house," he continued, "the liquid assets divided." Daniel stiffened. "Dad?" My father raised a hand. "Enough." Silence fell. My mother's voice was quiet when she spoke. "This feels like extortion." I turned to her. Extortion would be demanding something in exchange for silence. I never asked for silence. I asked for honesty. Daniel shook his head. You're punishing us. I felt a flicker of something then, not anger, sadness. You punished yourselves, I said, by believing I would always stay quiet. My father leaned back suddenly older than I remembered. Why didn't you say something sooner? I held his gaze. I did. You just didn't hear it as long as it came gently. That seemed to land. The lawyer joined us shortly after. He laid out the revised structure in careful language, explaining implications, timelines, safeguards. Daniel listened with clenched jaw. My mother stared at the table. I listened calmly, asking questions where needed, clarifying details, not pushing, not retreating. When the lawyer finished, my father looked at me. Is this enough? The question surprised me. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. For the first time, he wasn't asking me to accept less. He was asking what I needed. It's a start, I said honestly. Daniel scoffed. So that's it. You walk in, blow everything up, and walk away with half. I turned to him. I didn't blow anything up. I stopped patching cracks you refused to see. You think you're better than us now, he snapped. No, I said. I think I'm equal, and that scares you. He stood abruptly. This is insane. My mother finally looked up. Daniel. He shook his head and walked out. The door slammed. The house went quiet. My mother looked at me, her eyes glossy. You could have chosen peace. I met her gaze steadily. Peace built on erasure isn't peace, it's submission. She flinched. After the lawyer left, my father asked me to stay. He poured 2 glasses of water, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't protect you, he said quietly. I see that now. I didn't respond immediately. I thought he continued that if you didn't complain, you didn't hurt. I swallowed. That was your mistake. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry. The word hung in the air, not dramatic, not redemptive. Just there. I didn't forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness is heavier than people think. It requires change, not just regret. But I acknowledged it. Thank you for saying it, I said. When I left the house, the sky was already dark. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing through the strange mix of emotions in my chest. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost. I'd shifted the balance. That night, Daniel sent me a text. I don't recognize you anymore. I typed back. You never did. I turned off my phone. In the quiet that followed, something settled inside me. Not triumph, not revenge. Resolution. I finally understood that the most dangerous thing you can do in a family built on favoritism isn't to scream or fight or beg. It's to stop absorbing the cost. And as I drove home through the sleeping city, I knew this story wasn't finished yet. Because when the structure changes, so do the people clinging to it. And not everyone survives that shift with grace. The backlash didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, side glances, half sentences, carefully worded concern disguised as moral judgment. That's how families like mine fought back, not with confrontation but with whispers. The first sign was the silence. Daniel stopped replying entirely. Not even anger, just absence. A withdrawal so complete it felt calculated, as if he believed denying me attention would undo everything I'd done. My mother followed a different strategy. She called other people. I found out from my Aunt Margaret again, the only one who spoke plainly. She's telling everyone you manipulated the situation, Margaret said over the phone. That you used your professional background to pressure the bank. I smiled faintly. Did you correct her? I asked her one question, Margaret replied. Why accuracy feels like an attack when it stops benefiting you? I laughed softly. That must have gone well. She hung up. The narrative was shifting. I could feel it. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the problem. The disruptor. The ungrateful one. And strangely, that felt easier to carry than the old silence. At work, the timing couldn't have been worse or better depending on how you looked at it. A senior position opened up unexpectedly. Director level. Oversight of a regional compliance team. My boss called me into her office. You didn't apply, she said, studying my face. I wasn't sure I wanted it, I replied honestly. She nodded. People like you don't usually think you deserve it. That's why they're often the best choice. I felt a flicker of recognition. Are you offering it to me? I'm asking if you'd accept it. I thought of my family, the will, the quiet war unfolding behind polite smiles. Yes, I said, I would. The promotion came with visibility, authority, and most importantly, distance. When my mother found out, she called immediately. So now you're climbing over everyone else too, she said sharply. I closed my eyes. I earned it. You always have to prove something, she snapped. No, I replied. I stopped proving. I started choosing. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then your grandmother would be ashamed. That one hurt. She knew it would. I breathed through it. My grandmother taught me self-respect. Silence. Then the line went dead. That evening, Daniel showed up again. Not at my apartment. At my office. I was still there reviewing transition documents when the receptionist buzzed me. Your brother is here, she said, hesitating. He seems upset. I sighed. Send him in. He walked into my office like he owned the place, jaw tight, eyes hard. You're poisoning everyone against me, he said. I gestured to the chair. Sit down. He didn't. You're the one talking, I replied. I'm the one staying quiet. He laughed bitterly. You think people don't notice what you did? I think they're noticing what was already broken, I said. You embarrassed us, he snapped. You embarrassed me. I leaned forward slightly. You embarrassed yourself when you assumed I'd clean up your mess forever. His fists clenched. You think this ends with the will, he demanded. You think Mom's just going to accept this? No, I said. I think she's going to escalate. He froze. What do you mean? I smiled faintly. You didn't think I'd stop at defense, did you? His eyes narrowed. What are you planning? Nothing illegal, I replied calmly. Nothing unethical. Just visibility. He stared at me, realization dawning. You're going to expose everything, he whispered. I'm going to stop protecting it, I corrected. He shook his head. You're ruthless. I considered that. No, I said. I'm thorough. Security escorted him out when he refused to leave. That night I slept deeply for the first time in months. The next morning, my mother sent a message in the family group chat. We need to discuss boundaries. I stared at the screen, then typed. I agree. She responded almost immediately. This has gone too far. You've damaged relationships that can't be repaired. I replied. Damage happened long before I spoke up. No one else chimed in. That afternoon, I received an anonymous email. Subject line, you should know. Inside was a forwarded message thread. My mother Daniel and the family lawyer discussing options, strategies. Language like containment, reputation management, and limiting exposure. They weren't trying to reconcile. They were trying to control fallout. I forwarded the email to my personal folder, labeled it simply, Documentation. Later that day, my boss stopped by again. I heard you handled a difficult situation with Grace yesterday, she said. I nodded. I'm getting used to it. She smiled. People underestimate how dangerous calm women can be. I smiled back. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window watching the city darken. Somewhere my family was planning their next move. I wasn't afraid. Because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was anticipating. And as the lights flickered on below, I understood something that felt like the final turn of a key. Revenge doesn't always mean striking back. Sometimes it means stepping into the light so fully that everyone else's shadows become impossible to hide. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my mother's precise, elegant script. Thanksgiving dinner, her house, 6 in the evening. No apology, no explanation, just tradition used as leverage. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, already knowing what it meant. This wasn't reconciliation. It was theater, a controlled setting, an audience, an attempt to restore the image of a united family before rumors turned into conclusions. They wanted me there because my absence would speak louder than my presence. I replied with a single word. Yes. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were strangely calm, too calm. At work, I finalized my transition into the new role, signed documents, set expectations. The authority felt natural, not heavy, like something I'd grown into without noticing. At night, I reviewed the documentation I'd been collecting. Emails, financial notes, the anonymous thread. Not to use yet, just to know where the lines were drawn, because I had learned something important. When people feel cornered, they stop playing fair. Thanksgiving evening arrived cold and gray. I drove to my parents' house, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the familiar porch light glowing like a signal. Inside, everything looked perfect. The table set, the food arranged, the illusion carefully maintained. Daniel was already there. He didn't look at me. My mother greeted me like a distant guest, polite, cool, controlled. Happy Thanksgiving, she said. Happy Thanksgiving, I replied. Dinner began with forced small talk, weather, work, neutral subjects that skimmed the surface while tension hummed underneath. Halfway through the meal, my mother cleared her throat. I think it's important, she said, that we talk openly tonight. Daniel stiffened. My father set his fork down slowly. I agree, I said calmly. She turned to me, eyes sharp. You've changed. I nodded. I hope so. That's not what I meant, she snapped. You used to be considerate. I used to be quiet, I replied. Those aren't the same thing. Daniel laughed harshly. Here we go. My mother pressed on. You embarrassed this family. You turned private matters into professional scrutiny. I folded my napkin carefully. The scrutiny came from the bank. Because you invited it, she shot back. Because the numbers couldn't survive it, I corrected. My father finally spoke. Enough. Silence fell. This isn't about numbers, he said. It's about trust. I met his gaze. I trusted you. You didn't protect me. My mother shook her head. You're rewriting history. No, I said. I'm reading it aloud. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. You think you're some kind of hero. I looked at him steadily. I think I stopped being collateral damage. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with words that had waited years to be spoken. My mother stood abruptly. If you can't be grateful, then maybe you shouldn't be part of this family at all. There it was. The threat she'd always held back. Conditional love finally named. I stood too, my chair scraping softly against the floor. If belonging requires silence, I said evenly, then I was never really part of it. Daniel smirked. So dramatic. I turned to him. You confuse drama with accountability. My father looked between us, his face pale. Sit down, he said weakly. I'm done sitting, I replied. That's when my mother did something I didn't expect. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. You want transparency? She said. Fine. She slid it across the table toward me. Inside were copies of emails, old ones, years old. Discussions between my parents and the lawyer from the time the will was first drafted. I scanned the pages quickly. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd discussed me, deliberately. Concerns about my independence. Fears that including me would enable distance. The assumption that I would understand. I looked up slowly. You decided, I said quietly, that I didn't deserve security because I didn't demand it. My mother's voice trembled. We did what we thought was best. For who, I asked. She didn't answer. Daniel pushed his chair back. I'm done with this, he muttered. Before anyone could stop him, he stood and grabbed the folder from the table. You want exposure, he snapped. Let's talk about your precious documentation. My heart rate spiked. He waved the papers. You think I don't know what you've been collecting? I kept my voice steady. Put that down. He laughed. Or what you'll audit me to death. You already did that to yourself, I said. He leaned closer. You're bluffing. I met his eyes. I never bluff. My father stood suddenly. Daniel. Too late. Daniel tore the folder in half. Papers scattered across the floor like confetti. My mother gasped. Something in me went still. Not angry, not afraid. Certain. I bent down and picked up one piece of paper. Then another. I don't need copies, I said calmly. I have originals. Daniel froze. My mother's face drained of color. What do you mean? I straightened. The emails you're worried about weren't anonymous. They were forwarded. And they weren't the only ones. Silence slammed into the room. My father sank back into his chair. Daniel stared at me, realization flickering across his face. You planned this. No, I said, I prepared. I gathered my coat. This conversation is over, I said evenly. The lawyer will be in touch. My mother's voice broke. You're tearing us apart. I paused at the door. You did that, I said softly. I just stopped holding the pieces together. I walked out into the cold night, my breath visible in the air. I sat in my car for the long moment, hands steady on the wheel, heart finally calm. That was the night I understood something irreversible. They couldn't scare me back into silence. And once fear loses its power, everything else follows. The fallout was immediate but not loud. That's what surprised me most. There were no frantic calls that night. No midnight messages. No apologies disguised as concern. Just silence. The kind that isn't peaceful but strategic. They were regrouping. I woke the next morning to a gray sky and a strange sense of clarity. Not relief, not victory, clarity. The kind that comes when you've crossed a line you can't uncross, and instead of regret, you feel grounded. At work, everything felt sharper. My new role had shifted how people spoke to me. Less casual dismissal, more measured respect. Authority changes the air around you. Around mid-morning, my assistant knocked on my door. There's a call holding for you, she said. Private number. I already knew. Put it through, I said. It was the lawyer. I'm calling to inform you, he said carefully, that your parents have requested a pause on any revisions to the estate. I leaned back in my chair. On what grounds? Emotional distress, he replied, and concern about reputational harm. I smiled faintly. Interesting. Documents don't experience emotions. A pause. They're also questioning your role, he added, specifically whether your involvement constitutes undue influence. There it was. The counterattack. Are they alleging misconduct, I asked? No, he said quickly. Not formally, but they're positioning for leverage. Good, I said. Then let's proceed formally. He hesitated. Proceed how? With documentation, I replied. Timelines, emails, independent records, everything. Another pause. You've anticipated this, he said. Yes, I replied, because this was never about fairness. It was about control. After the call ended, I forwarded a folder to my personal legal counsel. Someone I'd hired quietly weeks ago, someone whose loyalty I paid for directly. Preparation looks like paranoia until it saves you. That afternoon, Daniel emailed me. Subject line, we need to talk like adults. I didn't respond. Instead, I received another message an hour later. This one from my sister-in-law. I don't know what's happening anymore. Daniel's barely sleeping. The stress is unbearable. I read it twice. Then I typed back, I'm not the cause, I'm just no longer the buffer. She didn't reply. That evening, my father called. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Your mother's not well, he said. I closed my eyes. What does that mean? I asked carefully. She's overwhelmed, he replied. This has taken a toll. I breathed slowly. This was the move I'd expected. Emotional leverage. I'm sorry she's distressed, I said. But distress isn't a reason to deny reality. You don't have to be so cold, he snapped. I opened my eyes. I've been warm my entire life. It didn't protect me. Silence. Then quietly. What do you want from us? The same question, again. I want you to stop framing accountability as cruelty, I said, and I want the truth to stand without punishment. That sounds like an ultimatum. No, I replied. It's a boundary. He sighed. Your mother thinks you're doing this to humiliate us. I'm doing this so I don't disappear again, I said. When the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering on outside. Somewhere my family was telling themselves stories that made me the villain. That was fine. Villains are remembered. The next development came from an unexpected direction. A former colleague from my father's company reached out, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I don't know if you remember me, his message read, but I heard what's going on. I thought you should know something. We met for coffee the next day. He looked nervous, scanning the room before speaking. Daniel's been blaming you internally, he said, saying you sabotaged the valuation. I nodded. That was inevitable. There's more, he said. Before the bank review, he tried to push through a side agreement. Deferred liabilities, off-books adjustments. My pulse steadied. Did it go through, I asked. No, he said. Compliance blocked it. But the attempt exists. Emails, drafts. I looked at him carefully. Why are you telling me this? He shrugged. Because you always did the right thing. And because I'm tired of watching him get credit for work he didn't do. I thanked him and left the cafe with my mind racing not from fear but from confirmation. Daniel hadn't just been careless. He'd been reckless. That night, I added another folder to my growing archive. Not to use immediately, just to be ready. 2 days later, the lawyer called again. The pause is temporary, he said. They're reconsidering their approach. Of course they are, I replied. They've asked whether you'd consider mediation. I smiled, with conditions. Name them. Full transparency, independent oversight, and acknowledgement that retaliation will end this permanently. He exhaled. You're very firm. I've been flexible my whole life, I said. This is new. Thanksgiving came and went in silence. No calls, no messages, no pretense. It hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted them back, but because I was finally grieving what I'd never truly had. And grief, I learned, doesn't weaken resolve. It sharpens it. Late one night, Daniel sent one last message. You think this ends with paperwork? It doesn't. I stared at the screen. Then I replied. Neither does silence. I turned my phone off and went to bed. Because the truth was simple and I finally accepted it. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was reclamation. And the closer we got to the end, the more dangerous it became for anyone still pretending I would fold. The mediation was scheduled for a Monday morning, deliberately, early, deliberately, formal. Neutral conference room, neutral mediator, neutral language meant to soften sharp truths. Nothing about it was neutral. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed simply carrying one slim folder. Not because I lacked material, but because I didn't need to display it. Power, I'd learned, speaks loudest when it's restrained. My parents arrived together. My mother's face was composed, almost serene, the way it always was when she intended to control the room. My father looked tired, older than he had a month ago. Daniel came last. He didn't look at me. The mediator began with ground rules: respect, listening, no interruptions, a ritual meant to convince everyone they were safe. My mother spoke first. This situation has spiraled, she said. What should have remained private became adversarial. I waited. We believe Evelyn has acted out of resentment, she continued, rather than necessity. The mediator turned to me. Your response? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I acted out of accuracy, I said. Resentment didn't create false projections. Numbers did. Daniel scoffed. The mediator held up a hand. Let's keep it constructive. My father spoke next. We want to repair this family. I nodded slowly. Repair requires acknowledgement of damage. My mother's lips tightened. Evelyn wants us to rewrite our will under pressure, she said. That feels coercive. I opened my folder and slid one document onto the table. Timeline, I said. Dates of decisions, dates of projections, dates of bank inquiries. You'll notice my involvement comes last. The mediator scanned it. Daniel leaned forward. You're making this sound calculated. It was, I replied calmly, just not by me. That landed harder than I expected. The mediator cleared his throat. Daniel, do you have anything to add? Daniel exhaled sharply. She's always done this. Plays the victim. Acts like she's smarter than everyone else. I met his eyes. You confused my silence with ignorance. He stood abruptly. I'm not doing this. The mediator intervened quickly. Daniel, sit down. He did, but his leg bounced beneath the table. My mother's voice trembled just slightly. What do you want, Evelyn? Say it plainly. I leaned forward for the first time. I want the retaliation to stop, I said. I want the will revised to reflect actual contribution, not favoritism. And I want it acknowledged in writing that I was excluded by choice, not oversight. My father swallowed. Daniel laughed bitterly. You want an apology. I want the truth, I said. Apologies come later. The mediator nodded slowly. Those are reasonable requests. My mother stiffened. Reasonable to whom? To reality, he replied. That was when Daniel made his mistake. He slammed his hand on the table. She threatened the company. She contacted the bank. I didn't react. The mediator looked at him sharply. Is that accurate? I spoke before anyone else could. I asked a compliance question, as I have for years. The mediator turned to Daniel. Did you attempt to alter documentation prior to the review? Daniel's mouth opened, closed. My father looked at him. What is he talking about? Silence. The mediator leaned forward. Mr. Carter. Daniel's face flushed. It wasn't finalized. That was all it took. My father stood slowly. You did what? Daniel exploded. I was trying to protect us. No, I said quietly. You were protecting yourself. The room cracked open then. Years of assumptions collapsed in a single moment. My mother looked at Daniel like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, and she didn't like what she saw. The mediator ended the session early. Outside, my father stopped me. I didn't know, he said. I know, I replied. He nodded slowly. We'll revise the will. I waited. And we'll include a statement, he added, acknowledging the exclusion. My mother didn't argue. She just looked away. Daniel stormed past us without a word. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt emptied, like something old had finally been removed. The revised documents arrived 2 weeks later. Equal division, oversight clauses, transparency requirements, language so precise it left no room for reinterpretation. I signed without hesitation. Daniel didn't. He delayed, objected, claimed emotional distress. And then finally he did the one thing I hadn't expected. He resigned from the company. Not gracefully, not publicly, just quietly citing health reasons. The board accepted. The business stabilized. And suddenly, without his presence, the chaos stopped. My mother called a few days later. You didn't have to go that far, she said. I didn't, I replied. He did. She was quiet for a long time. I don't recognize this family anymore, she said. I stared out the window at the city alive and indifferent. I do, I replied. This is who we've always been. We just hid it better. When the call ended, I felt something close to peace, not reconciliation. Closure. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd stopped lying about it. And in doing so, I'd reclaimed something far more valuable than money. My voice. After Daniel resigned, everything went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like a house after a storm, when the air hasn't decided what it's going to do yet. The company stabilized faster than anyone expected. That alone told me something important. Daniel hadn't been this pillar my parents believed he was. He'd been noise, motion mistaken for leadership. Once he was gone, decisions slowed, processes tightened, and the constant low-grade panic evaporated. I watched all of it from a distance. For the first time in my life, I wasn't inside the family machinery. I wasn't translating emotions, smoothing conflicts, absorbing blame. I was outside observing. And from the outside, patterns become impossible to ignore. My parents didn't call for a while. Not out of respect, out of confusion. Their usual strategies no longer worked, and they didn't yet know which mask to put on. When my mother finally did call, her voice was unfamiliar. Not sharp, not commanding. Tired. Daniel moved out, she said. I closed my eyes. Out of the house. Yes, she replied. He said he needed space. Space. The luxury he'd always been granted. How are you? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know. That was new. Your father's angry, she continued. Not at you, at himself. I said nothing. He keeps saying he should have listened sooner. I leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling the weight of that sentence settle slowly. And you, I asked? She exhaled shakily. I feel like I failed both of you. I thought of the letters, the meetings, the careful words designed to control outcomes. You failed by choosing comfort over fairness, I said gently. That doesn't mean you can't choose differently now. She didn't respond. The call ended quietly. Days passed, then weeks. The revised will was finalized and filed. No fanfare, no celebration, just ink drying on paper that reflected reality instead of fantasy. I didn't feel rich. I felt validated. At work, my new role expanded. More responsibility, more influence, less tolerance for half-truths. People noticed. A colleague pulled me aside one afternoon. You've changed, she said. You don't hedge anymore. I smiled faintly. I ran out of reasons to. That night, I went home and sorted through old boxes I'd carried with me through every move. Childhood drawings, report cards, letters I'd never sent. At the bottom of one box, I found a birthday card from my parents, years old. We're so proud of you for being so understanding, it read. I laughed softly and recycled it. Understanding had been my cage. The next development came unexpectedly. An email from Daniel. No subject line, just a few lines. I don't know who I am without the company, or without being the favorite. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I finally see what I took for granted. I read it twice, then I closed my laptop. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because I was finished explaining myself. That weekend, I visited my Aunt Margaret. She poured tea and watched me carefully as I sat across from her. You look lighter, she said. I am, I replied. She nodded. Your mother is struggling. I know. She built her identity around managing perception, Margaret said. When that collapsed, she didn't know who she was. I stirred my tea. That's not my responsibility. No, she agreed, but it is the consequence. One evening, my father showed up at my apartment. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands clasped, eyes searching my face. I won't stay long, he said. I stepped aside. We sat at my small kitchen table, the hum of the city filtering in through the windows. I thought being fair meant giving each of you what you needed, he said. I didn't realize I was deciding that based on who made things easiest for me. I nodded. That's how favoritism hides. It calls itself practicality. He swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at him. I'm not withholding it. I'm just not offering it prematurely. He accepted that. I wanted you to know, he said, standing, that I'm proud of you. The words landed softly, late, but real. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet and felt something shift again. Not closure. Integration. The story wasn't something I was fighting anymore. It was something I carried without strain. I thought about Daniel, about my mother, about the family we could have been if honesty hadn't been treated like betrayal. And then I thought about myself. The woman who'd spent her life being low-maintenance, understanding, easy. The woman who learned too late but not too late that those labels were never compliments. They were permissions. The final piece came on a rainy Thursday morning. A message from the family lawyer. Daniel has formally contested nothing. The estate stands as revised. This matter is closed. Closed. I sat back in my chair, rain streaking down the window behind me, and let the words settle. That night I poured a glass of wine and stood on my balcony, the city glowing below. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. For the first time, my life wasn't shaped by what I'd been denied or forced to accept. It was shaped by what I'd chosen to reclaim. And as the rain softened into mist, I understood something I wish I'd learned years earlier. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like freedom. The quiet that followed surprised me. Not the absence of conflict, but the absence of anticipation. For most of my life, I'd lived slightly braced, waiting for the next demand, the next adjustment I'd need to make to keep everyone else comfortable. When the legal matters closed, when the calls stopped, when the family story finally settled into something honest and unflattering, that tension didn't snap back. It dissolved. I noticed it first in small ways. I slept through the night. I stopped checking my phone compulsively. I made decisions without rehearsing how I would explain them to anyone else. Freedom, I learned, is quiet at first. A month after everything was finalized, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a thin notebook and a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was my mother's. I don't know how to talk to you yet. I'm trying to learn how not to control what I'm afraid of. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I see you now. No excuses, no guilt wrapped in obligation, just that. I closed the notebook and set it aside. Not as a promise, not as a rejection, as an option. At work, I began mentoring two younger women on my team, both sharp, both underestimated, both already learning the art of shrinking without realizing it. I didn't tell them my story outright. I didn't need to. I showed them instead. I spoke plainly in meetings. I credited their work publicly. I refused to soften facts to spare egos. One afternoon, one of them stopped by my office. "I've never seen someone say no so calmly," she said. "How did you learn that?" I smiled by saying yes for too long. She nodded slowly, like the answer landed somewhere deep. That evening, I went for a long walk through my neighborhood. The air smelled like rain and leaves. Windows glowed warmly. Ordinary lives unfolding without drama or inheritance or power struggles. For the first time, I didn't feel behind. Daniel never contacted me again. I heard through Margaret that he was consulting drifting, trying to rebuild an identity without applause. I wished him well, genuinely. Not because he deserved absolution, but because I no longer needed him to suffer for me to feel whole. My father sent occasional updates, neutral, respectful. He didn't ask for closeness. He accepted distance. My mother wrote once more months later, a longer letter, messier, less polished. "I don't know how to be a mother without managing outcomes. I'm trying. That's all I can promise." I folded it carefully and placed it beside the first. Some bridges aren't burned. They're simply closed for renovation. The true ending didn't arrive with a conversation or an apology. It arrived on a Tuesday morning unannounced when I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror at work. I looked steady. Not triumphant, not hardened, just present. The woman looking back at me wasn't the reliable one, the understanding one, the easy one. She was the one who stayed. Later that night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city humming below. I thought about the word revenge, how often it's misunderstood. People imagine revenge as destruction, as spectacle, as punishment. But real revenge, the kind that actually heals, doesn't burn everything down. It removes the lie that kept you small. My family didn't lose me because I spoke up. They lost the version of me who would disappear to keep them comfortable. And that loss, I realized, was necessary. If you're listening to this and something in my story feels familiar, let me say this plainly. If you were excluded, overlooked, written out because you were strong enough to handle it, that was never strength. That was convenience. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your self-erasure. And reclaiming your place doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. I used to believe justice meant being invited back in. Now I know better. Justice meant building a life so solid that no one else got to decide whether I belonged. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who paid the price for everyone else's comfort, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments, subscribe, and stay with me for the next one. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't payback. It's finally choosing yourself.